Friends, would you pray with me? Holy and loving God, ever present in this place, we ask that you take our minds and think with them, take our lips and speak with them, take our hands and work with them, and take our hearts and set them on fire with love for you and all of creation. Amen.
Amen.
I have never seen Game of Thrones, but I've heard they got dragons, fire-breathing dragons. I'm happy to say that our household is pretty pro-dragon these days. Rowan, the past 2 years, not one, the past 2 years, has worn the exact same costume that his mother lovingly made him, dragony. And we have one of those books on the table near his bed called Dragons Love Tacos. I highly recommend it. Just don't feed dragons salsa. They do not like salsa. But I'd have to say, we don't often hear about dragons in church. There is, although, an entire book in the Bible, rather the Apocrypha, or Deuterocanonical texts, so they're called, with the name dragon in it, Bel and the Dragon. I recommend the book, but we're not going to preach on that today, maybe another time. But this morning, just a month or so beyond the sheep and the cows of the Christmas creche, we encounter a biblical dragon. Revelations 12, so well read, thank you, by David, plunges us into that world of wild imagery, powerful symbols, signs, seals, omens, talismans, numerology, and lots of mystery. We begin with a portent. Portent is a sign or a symbol that needs to be decoded. A symbol of a pregnant woman clothed with the sun, standing on the moon, her head crowned with stars. Now there is cosmic pain for this cosmic mystic. She's crying out, about to give birth, literal birth pangs. We hear she is in agony. That's not all. There's a dragon lurking, waiting to devour the new child that she's about to bring into this world. You're glad you came through the snow this morning in church. It's fun to hear our scriptures read more like a Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings novel. This imagery is imagery we often don't hear on Sunday morning worship, at least here at this church, for this part of our scriptures never makes it into the Revised Common Lectionary. We get an idea as to why. There's a lot of complexity that we're not even going to touch this morning, be duly warned. But I want to say, even in our proximity to the Christmas story, it is very tempting to join the long Christian tradition that stems from the 6th century or so that imagines this woman as Mary, the mother of Jesus. And there are obvious natural connections to why the birthing of a male child into a world that seems ready to devour this one who is destined to rule. But I encourage us, at least this morning, to resist that temptation and to see her for the portent that she is, the symbolic sign that she becomes, and in that symbolism becomes even more powerful, more broad, and more universal than when linked to one historical figure. While the pain and agony and the dragon are missing, we, friends here at Church of the Covenant, have a wild privilege to gaze into an interpretation of this image of this woman on a weekly basis. If you are fortunate enough, like we are, to look up, you may see the image here on the south side. But if you're sitting there and maybe blocked by a pillar or two, you can look into your bulletin. There's an insert there for you, a close-up of this image, this Tiffany and Company stained glass wonder of a rendition, construed and brought into life by Frederick Wilson in the 1890s, entitled The Vision of St. John, which places this moonwalking woman in a wider context of these 8 windows. Some 80 saints and angels press forward to these central figures of this woman, and also the ascended Christ. And for many people, including the artist Wilson, many people have combined images in Revelation to interpret this woman. In this painting we see both the pregnant woman with the moon under her feet and the crown of 12 stars over the head, but also the triumphant spouse of Christ with a fine gown of pomegranate symbolizing the resurrection and the church. And as a result, many refer to her not only as Mary, but also the glorified church. And it is absolutely unfair to dip into Revelation as for just one part of one Sunday morning worship. So I apologize for that, knowing that there is much that we will not have time to explore. But as we look into this transcendent image before us in search of a spirit message for us, I want us to remind ourselves briefly of the wider context of this wild part of our scripture found at the very end of our Bible. Revelation is actually much better understood to be an apocryphal letter. Revelation, like so many books in the Bible, derives its name from the incipit, the first word written in the letter. This time in Greek, the word is apocalypse, which means to uncover. This is where we get the word apocryphal from Revelation. It's also known as the Apocalypse of John. And similar to the book of Daniel, Revelation falls into that common biblically understood literary context known as end of times writings. Before your brain goes into the often unsavory images that you may have linked with Revelation over the years, like the number 666, or Satan, or beasts, or fire, brimstone, heaven and hell, angels and demons, I want us to remember also some profound verses that we sometimes forget. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Often we hear such verses at times of death. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, a new Jerusalem. The home of God is among mortals. God will dwell with them and be with them. God will wipe every tear from their eye. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more. Do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, the living one. Because I live, you also will live. These profound words are also mixed in to this apocryphal letter known as Revelation. I believe I read some of these powerful words this past week on Thursday when I gathered with Joan Hill's family and Ron's children as we marked Ron's entrance into the eternal embrace of God as he died on Thursday morning. And these words came to us as we gathered as words of comfort, as words of direction, words noting what our deep promises are about the way of God and the ways of God in our world and the ways of life beyond death. In its broad scope, it's helpful to remember that Revelation was something that someone wrote to other people. This person purportedly named John, written to the 7 churches in Asia, not the only churches, but 7 of those in Asia Minor, what we consider to be Western Turkey today. And due to a very different style of Greek found in Revelation, scholars agree that this is not the same John as who wrote or was a part of the writing of the Gospel of John or the Epistles of John. Not linked to the Apostle John, but linked to this person who is known as a prophet of John, someone who intimately knew those churches that were once planted by Paul and others a generation before. This is sometime in the 70s or 80s or maybe 90s of the Common Era. Perhaps during the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero or the reign of Domitian a little further on. The context, either way, of this letter was a context of oppression, of occupation, of the overwhelming odds that the Roman Empire was putting upon this new expression of Judaism known as the Jesus Way, this new movement that was emerging from a broader context. But it was a context of uncertainty, of violence, of being a religious minority in a landscape. Jewish apocalyptic literature at this time often reflects a sharp distinction between the present evil age and the imminent future age of blessing. Something new that is emerging, something that will come perhaps with the birth pangs, something being announced as a new era. How we interpret Revelation, how we interpret any of our scriptures matter, and who we listen to while we are interpreting such scriptures deeply matters. One voice that I deeply appreciate coming out of Columbia Theological Seminary in Georgia, that Presbyterian institution, is Dr. Love Seacrest. She is the Vice President of Academic Affairs, Dean of Faculty, and Associate Professor of New Testament. And she has written a profound essay on this Revelation 12. This essay entitled Anti-Types, Stereotypes, and Anti-Types, Jezebel, the Sun Woman, and Contemporary Black Women, was written just a few years ago and speaks deeply about the images before us in Scripture and how they inform how we see the world today. She makes a lot of comparisons to this so-called Sun Woman and current activists and former activists in the civil rights movements of today and yesterday. She calls out co-founder of Black Lives Matter, Alicia Garza, who wrote, "When black people get free, everybody gets free," a paraphrase from that famous line from civil rights activist Hamer. And she makes those connections between this woman who is elevated but is also in pain. Someone who knows the world and knows the revelation that God wants, the vision that God wants. This early community who received this letter from John, these 7 communities who gathered, must have been seeking a vision. We know there's a lot of decoding and numerology involved in Revelation, and many make the clear comparison to 666 and the beast being Nero. Those Christian communities wanting to write in code about the domination before them, how to evade that, and how to be authentically who God is calling them to be in the face of real terror and real oppression. Barbara Brown Taylor wrote a wonderful sermon around Revelation 12 just after Hurricane Sandy hit New Jersey in the face of climate chaos. And she wrote, "Full disclosure, I do not like the book of Revelation. I do not like its violence, its vindictiveness, its opaqueness, its psychotic visions, its attitude towards women, its enemy thinking, its dualistic worldview, or its vacancy of love. I do not even like the people who like the book of Revelation, since so many of them use it to justify their crazier ideas about God and scare other people with what they think they know." Right now, someone's taking Hurricane Sandy and turning it into an apocalyptic message of judgment upon those who live in New Jersey. Taylor goes on to talk about the power of Revelation, the power of how we interpret it and how we use it. She reclaims Revelation in this sermon and points out that the Omega and the Alpha are both part of this story. We often talk about the Alpha, the beginning of our story, and God being at the beginning, infusing God's image within each of us and our beginnings. She goes on to talk about the power of knowing our Omegas, the power of knowing where we are headed, where we may end. In knowing the end times, we remember the Alpha and who we are more fully. Deep in the bonds of America's original sins of slavery and indigenous displacement and attempted eradication, songs emerged. From the pain of incredible confinement, verses flew freely into the air, telltale beacons that spoke of hidden messages of resistance that rose above the fray of captivity. These so-called African American spirituals inspired many a singer and many a listener, and spoke of this idea of a revelation, of a vision beyond what was possible or what seemed possible for people's daily reality. Sojourner Truth loved a spiritual known as a holy city, which spoke of a new Jerusalem. There is a holy city, a happy world above, beyond the starry regions, built by the God of love. An everlasting temple and saints arrayed so bright, they serve their great Redeemer and dwell with him in light. What shall be my journey, how long my stay below, or what shall be my trials, are not for me to know. In every day of trouble, I'll raise my thoughts on high. I'll think of the bright temple and crowns above the sky. Sojourner's truth brought more truth into this world. The way she sang this hymn, this spiritual, helped liberate her, to give her the resistance that she needed to overcome incredible odds. But remember, she was born into slavery in upstate New York, owned by many, many owners, so-called owners, enslavers, white supremacists, before she was even a young adult. As a young adult, as a young woman, she became mother to 5 children. And in 1826, at the age of 29, she felt the empowerment to walk off her farm and become free as she so-called took her freedom with her baby infant Sophia, Wisdom, in her arms. She had to make an incredibly difficult calculation and left some of her children still behind. And sadly, one of her child, Peter, was then sent south, as was happening just before emancipation broke forth into the northern realms of this country. People were often sold back into southern lands. Yet, determined above all odds, Sojourner Truth fought hard and became the first African-American woman to bring to trial against a white man a case that was successful. And she liberated her son and brought him back to be with her. And then she lived most of her life not far from her children and her grandchildren as she went on to become an incredible voice for justice, which changed the course of our country, no question. She persisted in the face of great odds. One of the images I really love about this text from Revelation 12, which is easy to miss, is how the earth comes to the help of this woman. But this woman was given 2 wings of the great eagle so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness to a place where she was nourished for time and time and time. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to help the woman. It opens its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Friends, this is an incredible text. This promise that the earth comes to help in the work of liberation. Do you recognize this ever in your life? You notice a flower that's changed you. You notice the beauty of new fallen snow in the midst of the landscape that silences some of the hush and the buzz. Breathing clean air on a daily basis. The earth saves us. The accompaniment of animal companions and their wild, unconditional love saves us. The earth comes to the aid and swallows the flood. This, friend, is an image of climate justice we so need to recognize and see in this time of the year, this time in our lives, this new decade. When I'm looking for inspiration in times of challenge, I continue to look toward the poets, and I'm grateful for poet Jan Richardson, who writes about this woman. This woman clothed with the sun haunts me, she writes, and she journeys with me. She whom God delivered, she who had a place prepared for her in the wilderness, she whom the earth came to aid, she holds out her garment to us. Those who cry out in agony, to those in travail and pained to be delivered, to those struggling toward freedom with the dragon's breath hot on their necks, she holds forth her fiery raiment, her dazzling cloak, her glorious robe. Here, in this image that Jan lifts before us, is the key to unlocking one message for us this morning. Something comes out of the heart of labor. This woman poised to bring birth in the face of adversity, the odds insurmountable, a dragon looming. The pain of labor brings her to liberation. Friends, I would claim we are laboring as a church right now. We're laboring to catch a vision for where we are to be called into this soaring new decade of the 20s, to see what might be potential for us as a community of faith. And I would say the odds are high. The odds before us, the chances and the potential pitfalls are very real. We move into this decade knowing that the trust in institution is probably, the institution of the church has probably never been at a lower point in history, at least in the history of Protestantism. Trust in places and voices for truth seems to be waning. At times we may grow a little nervous about the attendance in our own community, the challenges before us to keep a National Historic Landmark well kept, to keep a vision of prophetic and progressive Christianity alive. The dragons loom. It's easy to focus on their fiery breath and how they lie in wait. Yes, climate fires are real. They're burning out of control in Australia. Yes, there are floods from Maria. They're still felt and now earthquaked Puerto Rico. Yes, there are fires here of those experiencing homelessness here at our doorstep. Imagining the cold that many have endured here in Boston. The dragon fire lurks. And yes, the fires of racism still burn in our country. Just recently heard from some of our eco-stewards that Richmond, Virginia is poised right now to hear and to witness a very fearful public gathering tomorrow of angry gun owners hungry to start a war in our country, white supremacists planning to encircle the Capitol in Virginia tomorrow. Many civil rights advocates are telling others to stay away, to let them embarrass themselves, and not to counter them. Friends, the fears are real in our world. The fires burn, the dragons loom. But the message of Revelation is that this dragon meets its end. Yes, the angels join in the woman and the earth to overcome the dragon in the end. For the truth is powerful and will prevail. The work of justice is hard. It's unclear. We don't know the future. None of us know the future as we make difficult and risky decisions in the coming weeks as a congregation, and as individuals, as we think about our Alpha and we think about our own Omega. We have limited days, we have limited years on this planet. And yet, the promise of this image, the promise of the woman who stands before us, this feminine deity who looks down upon us, the message of this woman is that the light from within her is the light within us. And her cloak extends to embrace all of us. Her cloak empowers us to make difficult decisions, to make exciting decisions as a community, and to walk in the spirit of MLK, the spirit of Sojourner Truth, and to soak in and trust in that divine light that will never fail, that will resound and will shine upon us and within us, now and always. May we walk and not give up the fight. Amen.